Chapter 3: Deeper Waters. The next days passed in a blur of uncomfortable silences and pointed evasions. Zaph returned to work at Bits and Bytes, repairing computers with a mechanical precision that required just enough focus to keep his darker thoughts at bay. Ted behaved as if nothing unusual had happened, discussing RAM upgrades and video card installations with the same casual friendliness he'd shown before New Year's Eve. If not for the occasional knowing glance, Zaph might have convinced himself that the entire night had been some alcohol-induced hallucination. Mary, for her part, seemed oddly energized by her new job at the department store. She came home with stories about customers and co-workers, her eyes brighter than they'd been in months. She didn't mention Ted, Zaph didn't ask, though the question burned in his throat like acid reflux. They were actors in a play where no one had bothered to write the second act, improvising lines, avoiding the elephant in the room, performing normalcy with varying degrees of success. It couldn't last, of course. Things left to fester always find a way to erupt. The invitation came on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after New Year's. Ted mentioned it casually as they were closing up the shop, his voice carefully neutral as he suggested that Zaph and Mary come over for dinner on Saturday. "Sue's making her famous lasagna," he added, not quite meeting Zaph's eyes. "The kids are staying at her mother's for the weekend." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy as thunderclouds. Zaph's first instinct was to refuse, to create some excuse that would keep them safely away from the morrow's house of temptations. But curiosity, a darker, more dangerous emotion than he cared to admit, pushed him to nod and say, "I'll check with Mary, but I think we're free." Ted's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Great, 7 o'clock. Bring wine if you want." "We don't have to go," Zaph said later that night, watching Mary's reaction carefully as she folded laundry with precise, almost angry movements. "Why wouldn't we?" Her voice was deliberately casual, but her fingers tightened on the shirt she was folding, knuckles whitening. "They're your boss and his wife. It would be rude to refuse." "After what happened on New Year's?" Zaph kept his tone neutral, though anger simmered just beneath the surface. Mary's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their task with forced calm. "I thought we weren't talking about that." "We haven't been. Maybe that's the problem." She turned to face him then, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and something else. Fear, perhaps, or shame disguised as bravado. "What do you want me to say, Zaph? That I'm sorry? Would that make you feel better?" The truth was, he didn't know what he wanted from her. An explanation, maybe. A reason why she'd gone along with Ted and Sue's twisted game so readily. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped behind pride and a growing sense that whatever she said wouldn't change what had already happened. "I just want to know if you want to go," he said finally, retreating from the confrontation that hovered just out of reach. Mary returned to her folding, shoulders rigid with tension. "We should go," she said after a long pause. "It would be awkward at work for you if we didn't." Zaph nodded, though she wasn't looking at him. "Saturday at 7 then." The morrow's house looked different this time, less magical, more predatory, like a Venus flytrap disguised as a harmless bloom. The cheerful Christmas lights were gone, replaced by subtler landscape lighting that cast the colonial in shadows and golden highlights. It reminded Zaph of stage lighting, appropriate for the performance they were all about to give. Sue opened the door in a dress that managed to be both elegant and provocative, cut low enough to suggest, but not so low as to be obvious. Her smile was practiced, her eyes evaluating Mary's appearance with the quick assessment of a general sizing up enemy troops. "You look gorgeous," she told Mary, embracing her with a warmth that seemed genuine despite everything. "That color is perfect on you." Mary preened under the compliment, smoothing the fabric of her deep green dress, one Zaph had never seen before, which meant she'd gone shopping specifically for tonight. The realization sent an unpleasant shiver down his spine. Ted appeared behind his wife, all smiles and hearty greetings. He'd traded his usual tech shop attire for slacks and a button-down shirt that strained slightly around his middle. Come in, come in." "Drinks are waiting, and Sue's been cooking all day." The evening started innocently enough. They ate lasagna that was indeed excellent, drank perhaps too much wine, and made conversation that carefully skirted any topic of substance. Ted talked about a new computer he was building for a client. Sue discussed plans for redecorating their bedroom. Mary contributed stories from the department store, and Zaph offered the occasional comment when silence threatened to expose the tension thrumming beneath the surface. It was after dinner, when they moved to the living room with fresh drinks, that the atmosphere shifted. Ted put on music, something low and vaguely jazzy that filled the awkward gaps in conversation. Sue kicked off her shoes and curled her legs beneath her on the sofa, her dress riding up just enough to draw the eye. "I was thinking," Ted said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "about New Year's." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mary's smile froze in place. Zaph felt his muscles tense, as if preparing for impact. "What about it?" Sue asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Ted leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. The way things happened." He glanced at Zaph with something like apology. "It wasn't how we usually do things." "Usually?" The word escaped Zaph's lips before he could stop it. A look passed between Ted and Sue, a married couple's silent communication, loaded with history and shared secrets. "We've had other friends," Sue clarified, her voice deliberately gentle, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "Couples we've connected with. But it's always been open, honest. What happened on New Year's?" She shook her head. "That wasn't right." "So why did you do it?" Zaph asked, aware that his tone had hardened, that the simmer of anger was approaching a boil. Ted had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We'd been drinking. You two seemed, I don't know, like you might be open to experimenting. I made assumptions I shouldn't have." "Assumptions," Zaph repeated flatly. The word was so inadequate for what had transpired that it bordered on insulting. "What Ted's trying to say," Sue interjected, "is that we'd like to start over. If you're interested in exploring possibilities, we'd like to do it the right way, with everyone knowing exactly what's happening and what they're agreeing to." The silence that followed her statement was thick enough to cut with a knife. Zaph looked at Mary, expecting, hoping, to see the same outrage he felt reflected in her expression. Instead, he found something that turned his blood to ice: interest, curiosity, a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with wine. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Mary asked, and Zaph could hear the excitement beneath her carefully controlled tone. Ted smiled, relief evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. "Just that we see where the evening takes us. No pressure, no expectations. If anyone wants to stop at any point, we stop. Simple as that." Simple, as if what they were discussing was as uncomplicated as deciding which movie to watch. "And if we're not interested?" Zaph asked, the words coming out sharper than he'd intended. Sue's gaze shifted to him, those calculating eyes assessing and recalibrating. "Then we finish our drinks, have some dessert, and you go home. No hard feelings, no awkwardness at work. We're all adults here." Zaph looked at Mary again, silently pleading with her to shut this down, to suggest they leave. But she was watching Ted with an expression that Zaph hadn't seen directed at himself in months. Desire, raw and unfiltered. Something broke inside him then, the last thread of hope that their marriage could be salvaged, perhaps, or the final barrier holding back the darkness that had been growing since New Year's Eve. Either way, he felt it snap like a guitar string wound too tight, the release sending vibrations through his entire being. "Fine," he heard himself say, the word coming from that other place inside him, the cold, calculating part that had emerged during his encounter with Sue. "Let's see where the evening goes." Ted's smile widened, revealing teeth that suddenly seemed too sharp in the dim lighting. "Excellent. More drinks, then?" What followed was a dance of calculated moves and counterplays, each couple circling the other like wary predators, sharing the same hunting ground. They played cards for a while, a pretext for the casual touches that grew increasingly bold as the alcohol flowed. Ted's hand lingering on Mary's when she passed him a card. Sue's foot finding its way to Zaph's ankle beneath the table. Zaph observed it all with a strange detachment, as if watching a movie starring people who looked remarkably like himself and his wife. The anger was still there, burning steadily beneath his ribcage, But it had transformed into something colder, more purposeful. This wasn't about pleasure for him. It was reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on the enemy. And Mary had become the enemy, he realized with a clarity that should have been devastating, but instead felt merely factual. She had chosen this, chosen Ted, chosen this lifestyle that Zaph had never wanted. She was complicit in her own betrayal, and that changed everything.